Okay, this screencast is going to start at the very beginning of Chapter 9. And we're going to first start just with a quick little review since it's been several days since we last left off with the end of Chapter 8, South Carolina's secession. So remember that this man, Abraham Lincoln, was elected president in the 1860 presidential election. And by December 20th of 1860, South Carolina would choose to secede or leave the Union. And then on your outline, you're going to notice a list of states that follow South Carolina's action to secede. These other states will choose to secede as well: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. You're never going to have to memorize those exact states or their dates under any circumstances. You'll have to know December 20th for South Carolina's secession as kind of the start of the Civil War, but I just kind of wanted you to see that all of these states will follow suit, which means all of these states together are saying that they are no longer part of the United States of America and they will form their own country called the Confederate States of America. You do have another side note next to Virginia. We are going to see a group of Virginians not want to secede. They're actually going to make a motion to stay as part of the Union, and this is where we get the state of West Virginia today. The reason West Virginia becomes a separate state is because that part of Virginia did not want to leave the Union, okay, and that will happen. West Virginia will be enacted as a separate state that did not leave the Union a couple of years after the war began. Now, while the Confederacy was run a little bit differently than the U.S., because it will want to give the states' rights more power over the central government, they will still, of course, have a central government. They need a central government if they're to do battle against the North. You know, they're never going to outlast or win the Civil War if, well, they're not going to win anyway, but they would definitely not have a chance of winning if they allowed the states to fight separately on their own against the United States of America. They're going to have to be together if they have a chance of winning. So we're going to see a central leadership kind of elected. We see Jefferson Davis elected as the president. You see these names on their screen as well. We see Jefferson Davis elected as the president. We see Alexander Stephens elected as the vice president of the Confederacy. And we see the capital city of the Confederacy established as Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia is established as the capital city. A bit surprising as it's a little more in the north, but it's still a southern state. Okay, Fort Sumter is going to be the first point of conflict between the North and the South, and what tells us we actually are going to have an official war. So we're going to look at that in a little more detail now. So when the United States, when the South secedes, and when the Southern states secede and leave the Union, they order all U.S. troops to evacuate any fort in the South. Okay? So when the South secedes, the South orders all U.S. troops to evacuate any fort in the South. Try to process what that is saying, because it does get a little confusing. The South is saying they are no longer part of the United States of America, but there were several U.S. forts already in southern states, and there are U.S. troops in those forts because that's where they're stationed. So what the South is saying is, no, this fort is now in South Carolina. South Carolina is no longer part of the Union, so you are an American soldier. You need to leave this fort. You are no longer in charge of this area. Okay, well, obviously these troops are not going to leave right away, so it becomes an issue of how to handle this. Okay, you kind of have a bit of a standoff between the troops and the states that the forts are located in. Okay, and the U.S. government is not ordering those troops to stand down because the U.S. government is not acknowledging the South's right to order the U.S. troops to stand down. Okay, so remember that we're going to look at South Carolina specifically. There's a fort in South Carolina called Fort Sumter. It's kind of right outside of Charleston, okay? And in the water, actually. It's kind of like an island. Now, the the South Carolina decides to secede as soon as Abraham Lincoln was elected, but he actually was not yet inaugurated. So he wasn't the first president at the beginning of the Civil War because Buchanan had been finishing his term. Buchanan is kind of weak on the matter. He doesn't really address the issue of Southern secession. He basically says, he basically feels, I think, he's just going to wait for the next president to have to deal with it. He's almost done his term. He doesn't want to be the president that has to deal with this mess. He basically says, the South really doesn't have a right to secede, but I don't have the right to go after the South and force them back in, so I'm just going to wait for Abe Lincoln to have to deal with this mess. And when Abraham Lincoln becomes president, he basically sends a ship full of both supplies as well as soldiers towards Fort Sumter. The reason he's sending a ship full of supplies is the American troops that are that are waiting and trying to hold up Fort Sumter and not evacuate or surrender it, they're running out of food and accommodations, and they need resources if they're going to stay there and try to hold the fort. So Abraham Lincoln starts heading towards Fort Sumter with this ship of supplies and soldiers and basically says, listen, I'm going to make this delivery, and I'm going to make this delivery, and I will use these soldiers to fight back if you try to stop me. So it's kind of a standoff. Who's going to shoot first? Okay? Because Abraham Lincoln is saying, I'm going to make this delivery to my soldiers in Fort Sumter, and if you try to stop me, I'm going to use these troops against you. Well, inevitably, fighting does break out. And after a day or two, the American soldiers at Fort Sumter are going to surrender Fort Sumter to South Carolina. Now we know the North will be fighting to get the South back. The United States is not going to surrender and allow the South to leave. Abraham Lincoln has just made his public statement that we're going to fight to keep the South as part of the country. Because if they weren't going to fight, then they would have just asked the U.S. soldiers to get out of the fort and leave the South alone. But they're going to fight for it. So now that we know we're going to have a war, let's look at the two sides and kind of compare them just a little bit. So in the North, I'm going to refer to the North as the Union or the United States, because they remain the United States the whole time. They never leave. Abraham Lincoln will politically lead the North, and some of the key generals of the North are going to be Ulysses S. Grant and William T. Sherman. Compared to the North, we have the South. The South will be nicknamed the Confederacy or the Confederate States of America, aka the CSA. You can kind of see the map on the screen of all the southern states that do secede, so you see the difference between the North and the South. Politically, again, we met President Jefferson Davis. He's in charge of the Southern government. Military speaking, the main Southern general you need to be aware of is Robert E. Lee. Looking at the advantages and the action plans of the North compared to the South at this time. So first, the North. We see in the North that they have more people, bigger populations, more factories, greater food production, a already established government. Those are some obvious advantages for the North, while the Southern advantage is that they have very highly motivated soldiers, very successful generals. Robert E. Lee is one of the best generals for the United States Army before all the states secede, and South Carolina secedes. Eventually Virginia does, and Virginia is going to be Robert E. Lee's home, and he says, I'm an American, but I'm a Virginian first, and I'm going to fight for Virginia. So, that's a big advantage for the South, that they have people like Robert E. Lee. Also, cotton is still very much a wealthy source, a resource for the South. They're making a lot of money off cotton, so that's an advantage for the South as well. Now, the Northern Action Plan versus the Southern Action Plan, this is a big difference here, because if the North wants to win this war, they have to conquer every single southern state that left. They can't just leave one stone unturned. They have to go after every southern state that left. At the same time, the South isn't trying to conquer the North. The South is just trying to be its own country. So the action plan of the South, as compared to the North, is that the South basically just has to keep fighting until the North gives up. They have to just outlast the North. That's a bit of an advantage for the South, I would say. The fact that their action plan is a little bit easier, just outlasting the North, not trying to invade and conquer the North. Now, we're going to see some states in the middle, and I want you to be aware of these states: Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. These 4 states are considered border states. Think about where they physically are. They're kind of on the line in between the North and the South. These are going to be 4 slave states that do not secede. They are the 4 slave states that do not secede. They're not really taking sides here. They definitely maybe support the Southern cause a little bit more, but not the action. They're not choosing to go try to invade, or not try to invade, try to fight the North or rebel against the North. They don't want to leave the country over slavery. They don't need it that badly. So they're going to be allowed to keep their slaves for now because, again, Abraham Lincoln has not once yet tried to free the slaves that are already illegally allowed to exist in these slave states. He just doesn't want to allow it to spread anywhere. That's not the same thing as freeing the slaves or abolishing slavery. That's going to come later. For now, he's going to leave these states alone. Some battles will take place in these states because of where they're located, in the middle, but they're not going to be joining either side. Okay, we're going to stop the screencast here. On class on Monday, we'll go over the first 2 battles, and then y'all will complete a little activity for me, and we will continue on with the notes in chapter 9. All right, I hope y'all all have a good day. Write down any questions you may have, and I will see y'all in class Monday.